Welcome to r/Prorevenge, where OP completely destroys her scummy landlord.
Today's episode is sponsored by ExpressVPN. I just got back from traveling abroad, and I'm so glad that I had ExpressVPN. With ExpressVPN, I can set my location to any country I want, which allowed me to access content and video game servers that are otherwise only available to people in the US. But even if you don't travel abroad, ExpressVPN offers great value. One of the biggest benefits is that it protects your privacy. Your internet service provider can see all those naughty websites you visit, but when you're behind a VPN, they don't have a clue. You can browse in complete privacy.
ExpressVPN is especially important if you connect to public Wi-Fi. When you're on public Wi-Fi, your device's data is vulnerable to anybody else who's on that network, including hackers.
Another great benefit is that ExpressVPN allows you to unlock content on streaming platforms. Due to annoying licensing restrictions, a streaming platform will have a show, but they won't be able to stream it everywhere. With ExpressVPN, you can change your location to unlock shows that you're already paying for.
For example, I unlocked Lord of the Rings by connecting to Australia.
Go to expressvpn.com/r/ to get 3 months free.
Our next Reddit post is from Zarina Blue. My ex-husband and I have always gotten along very well, and we have a daughter. We've always lived near each other for convenience sake, and have on occasion even lived in the same house after divorcing. So I was thrilled when the people across the street from him sold their place, and apparently it was going to be available for rent. I had known the folks across the street. Nice people, and I'd even been in their house a time or two. So when I showed up with my other half to look the place over, I kinda knew what we'd be getting. The landlord was working on the house when we pulled up. His big old pickup truck was in the drive with his company name stenciled on it. He meets us in the garage and immediately starts lying. He told me this was his family home and he was fixing it up. But there were a lot of memories there and his kids had grown up in that house. I realized he was adding value. I kept my mouth shut because it was right across the street from my ex-husband, and it was literally the bus stop for my daughter's school. He continued to lie, and I kinda tuned him out. The place was a little worse for wear. Dirty, gross carpet, chipped paint. I made a comment on a broken light switch, and he told me he was having a cleaning crew come through and clean up the place and having everything painted and the carpet redone. The price was a little high, but once again, I really wanted it, and it wasn't nightmare high, just $200 more than what I was expecting. I had a small Australian Shepherd, so the first month's rent and the last month's rent and the pet deposit. $1,250 for each one. Ouch. So about 2 weeks later, it was move-in day. I should have known something was up when the key was left in a combo box on the door. We had paid through a service, so he had the money and we had the key. And a mess. He had done literally nothing except replace a set of rotted outdoor steps that he probably had to for liability purposes. We dragged out the digital camera and started taking pictures. It was a 3-bedroom, 2-bath with a partial basement. We took over 1,100 pictures. Here are some highlights. Ketchup smeared on the kitchen walls and floor. Nothing in there had been cleaned. The fridge was awful. It had what smelled like hair gel rubbed into it in the dining room and outside the front bathroom door. The fireplace literally had soot covering all of it and up to the ceiling. The garbage was full of trash. And the partial basement, which we hadn't seen because that was where he'd set up a big saw and it wasn't really a selling point for us anyways, mold. All the mold. So I called him up and basically said, "What the hell?" And he replied that money and keys had already exchanged hands, and if I had a problem, I needed to put in a maintenance request. He said, "I don't remember it being that bad. Sounds like you made a mess moving in." Okay, so now I knew exactly how terrible of a person I was dealing with. I put in a maintenance request about the mold. I went out and bought all the bleach, other cleaning supplies, and a carpet cleaner. I'm a military brat who lived in base housing. I know how to clean. And we got to work. It took 2 days of 4 adults, my ex and a friend came over to help to get the place passable. We even changed the blinds. They were broken and dangerous. During this, the landlord comes over to look at the mold, and I kid you not, grabs a roll of my paper towels and my bleach spray and starts wiping the mold off the walls. He had just walked into the garage, grabbed some cleaning stuff that I had down in the garage, and I found him about halfway through his cleaning job. That's all he did. Fast forward 3 months. Time for an inspection. Okay, he tells me he'll be there tomorrow at 8 a.m. He shows up at 6:30 p.m. and demands to be let in. I let him in, and he starts taking pictures of dishes in the sink, dinner was still on the table, and lecturing me about cleaning up when I cook. So, in front of him, I pulled out my digital camera and took one of him taking a picture of dishes for dinner with dinner still on the table and the timestamp. What a butthole. He wanted to go through the drawers in my bedroom. I laughed at him. I didn't hear from him again until move-out time. If you thought I was staying there longer than a year, then you're crazier than I was when I rented that place. He sent me a move-out checklist. Professional steam cleaning and white glove clean of the entire house. New pine straw for landscaping. All rooms needed to be repainted to the color of wheat. When we moved in, the bathroom was literally turquoise. So we got to work, steam cleaned, white glove clean, etc. Then took another 1,000 pictures. He walks through and is pissed. He even ran a white rag on the top of the ceiling fan. He snatched the keys out of my hand and told me to expect to hear from him in 10 days about the deposit. That doesn't sound good. 2 weeks later, I get a bill for $3,750 for more professional steam cleaning, an HVAC cleanout, and apparently we didn't use the right brand of wheat. Oh, yes we did. 2 things I haven't disclosed. I have a bad habit of recording bad people to just cover my butt. And my mom is a landlord in the next state. But my mom was very familiar with the laws and had looked up a few things about my landlord. So I grabbed my little recorder and called him. He owns a real estate business. His side is rental stuff, and his wife's and grown daughters bought and sold houses. His oldest daughter picks up and transfers me to him. It gets ugly fast, and he tells me that I must have let my Australian Shepherd pee in the vent grates. What? And that the way that I take care of my daughter would be very interesting to Child Protective Services. He can help me work out a payment plan, but pretty soon we'd be getting into collections territory. At one point, he actually says, "All tenants are liars." Nice. It was about 20 minutes of being threatened. I call my mom back, and I'm pretty shook up. CPS for what? So my mom tells me to pretend like I'm playing along and ask for an itemized receipt. To tell him that my mom is going to cover it, and tell him that your mom needs it before turning over the money. I had an itemized receipt 10 minutes after I asked for one. The professional steam cleaner was a friend of mine who had a business and gave me a discount. The HVAC was a scam. The company he listed belonged to his brother-in-law. It was defunct and out of another state. Since I had all those photos, I knew he hadn't hired anyone to do HVAC cleaning. The vents were painted to the wall in all the pictures. We saved our paint receipts, and I actually had pictures of us painting. You can see the right brand and color clear as day. I called his business and told his daughter that I'd be taking him to court. She obviously was unaware of what a turd her father was, because when I told her, "No one threatens my little girl," she didn't know what I was talking about. So I put her on speakerphone and played a recording of her dad threatening to have CPS come visit if I didn't pay up. And she made it most of the way through before asking me to turn it off. Then she put me on hold to get her mom, his wife. She tried to reason with me, and I backed up the tape to the part where he talks about what happens to kids in the foster system and played it. She told me they'd get back to me. And they actually did. The mom and eldest called me on speakerphone and apologized. They told me how the business was divided and how they normally don't deal with the rental stuff. I told him that was fine, but I'm still taking him to court. So in court, we ended up in arbitration. I showed up with 2 laptops for before and after pictures, proof of his fake HVAC, a stack of literal receipts, and him committing a crime by threatening to falsely call CPS, and a pretty good working knowledge of renter law in that state. At one point, the arbitrator asked if I was a paralegal. All he had was a picture of dirty dishes and stories about how I lived like a pig. I pulled up the picture of the same sink of dishes with dinner in the foreground, time and date stamped. The arbitrator actually asked him, "Did you expect her to do the dishes before she ate her dinner?" Even the woman taking notes for the arbitrator was grossed out when I showed them the ketchup and basement mold pics. Did you know that you can get 3 times what you ask for in a rental dispute, depending on your state? Yeah, you can, and I did. The arbitrator used the word appalling when describing the landlord's behavior. When I went out in the hallway afterwards, there was a young couple there asking the clerk if the landlord was available yet. Apparently, they were waiting for their turn at arbitration. I asked them if their case was HVAC related, and sure enough, it was. I pulled out all the paperwork I had about it and handed it to them with my number. I actually got several calls from his other tenants. He'd been running that scam a while, and these kids I handed the paper to looked up every house on the landlord's website and went door to door warning them. Smart. I hadn't thought of that. Meanwhile, my mother was filing a complaint with everyone she could think of because he had his business listed as a suite, which turned out to be a P.O. box. That's a huge no-no. Your business must be a location that can be served by the courts. A year later, I saw a truck with his logo drive past, but it wasn't the first truck I saw. It was an older F-150. So I looked him up in the county clerk's records. Well, first, it seems he got divorced and cleaned out. The house, the big truck, everything went to her. Then she sued him for the business. He got to keep the name, and she took everything else. I looked up the realty website using her maiden name to search. Her and her eldest daughter were using her maiden name and had a whole new webpage and setup. Also, my mom got notice that her complaint was being addressed, and he had his license suspended and a huge fine to get it reinstated. My mom kept an eye on the records for his home deeds in the area, and all but 2 of his properties were sold at auction. So let's sum up. He had to pay me 3 times what I asked for, lost his big money-making scam, lost his wife, lost his houses, lost his truck, and lost his license for a while. No regrets. Our next Reddit post is from Fantastic Cake. This isn't my story, but from my educational advisor, one of the legit funniest people I've ever met. The other day, we were talking about our school times and the differences between being educators and students when she started telling this story. She used to be the model student, getting along with all the teachers and getting the best grades in her classroom. But there was that one teacher that she could not get along with. It was her chemistry teacher, and she described her as, all teachers have that breaking point where they just start screaming, but hers was incredibly easy to find. So that teacher was just an unliked teacher and someone my advisor just dealt with. But one day, my advisor reached her breaking point when her brother told me that this teacher was calling him stupid and screaming at him for not knowing an answer that she hadn't even properly explained yet. That was when she got involved in a plan, the famous toilet bomb. Because my advisor had the same gender as the teacher, she knew where and when this rude teacher would use the restroom. She had a strange routine with the exact time and stall she used to use. And because my advisor was a model student, she could come and go without being even noticed, since no one would assume she was up to no good. The thing is, the whole class was in on it. Before she got involved with the plan, though, there was a single condition. No one would rat or blame someone else. No one was supposed to say anything. She had a plan. And to the toilet the bomb went. My advisor went to the stall, installed the toilet bomb, and went back to class at the exact time that the rude teacher had her restroom break. When she came back from doing the deed, she sat down at her desk and heard the explosion, followed by rude teachers screaming bloody murder and coming back to class to scream at them. The only classroom that was on break for the teacher transition was my advisor's class. So the rude teacher beelined straight to them and started demanding to know who did this. Of course, she gets radio silence. She jumped in anger like a toddler, made all the threats that she legally could do, and made the biggest tantrum you could imagine, while being absolutely soaked in toilet water. Radio silence. The next logical step for the rude teacher was to call the principal, who arrived at class with a box filled with pieces of paper. The principal explained that everyone was to write the name of someone involved in the toilet bomb and return the paper to be read by her at the end of class. That was when my advisor stepped in. The second the principal was out of the class, she told everyone to just write, "It was me," in capital letters and put the paper back in the box, which everyone did. When the principal came back and started looking at the papers in front of the class, she slowly turned from a normal color to a deep, fiery red and started throwing her own tantrum. Guess they found out her breaking point. And she did the only thing that she could do at that point. She suspended the whole class for 3 days. In the end, my advisor did everything. Blew up the toilet, led the class to not snitch on anyone, and earned 3 days at home with no one suspecting anything. That was r/Prorevenge, and if you like this content, check out my podcast where I publish the exact same episodes. Also, hit that subscribe button because I put out new Reddit videos every single day.